The Starfire drifted through the cold expanse of the nebula frontier, its hull scraped by cosmic dust, the only sound within its cramped bridge, the hum of failing systems. Captain Sierra Williams stood at the helm, eyes narrowed as the dim light of a distant star flickered through the viewports. The ship had seen better days, but it was still hers, and that counted for something. "Report, Jax," she barked, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Nolan Jax, hunched over a console, ran a hand through his dishevelled hair, his face a mixture of concentration and exhaustion. His eyes flickered as he tapped a few keys. "We're drifting on fumes, Cap. The fuel's almost gone. The engines can barely maintain low thrust, and the coolant's shot. In short, we're not going far unless I get my hands on more parts." Sierra's gaze lingered on the map projected in front of her, the coordinates marked in red. "We don't have time for a detour. What's the damage on our shields?" Jax turned, a faint grin appearing on his face despite the situation. "The shields are holding. Barely. At this point, they'll stop a mosquito, but not much else." A heavy sigh escaped Sierra's lips, but she knew he was right. Their situation was dire. The human fleet was scattered across the galaxy, driven to the brink of extinction after the relentless assaults of the Exithar Dominion, the coalition of alien empires hell-bent on wiping humanity out. But this mission, this desperate gamble, was all that remained. A single encrypted message they needed to deliver to the Galactic Council. "We make it, or we don't," Sierra said, more to herself than anyone else. She glanced at the rest of her crew, each lost in their thoughts. "Prepare for approach. We'll make it to the outpost, and then we'll figure out what comes next." The crew of the Starfire was anything but ordinary. Sierra knew that, but it wasn't just her leadership that kept them going. It was the people who stood with her. Lena Voss, the ship's communications officer, stood by the starboard window, gazing out at the nebula. Her eyes, often filled with wonder, now carried a solemn weight. She'd spent the last few months trying to piece together the broken fragments of her once boundless optimism, but it was hard, even for someone as idealistic as her. She turned to Sierra, her voice calm but laced with an underlying sadness. "Do you think they'll listen?" Lena asked, her tone barely above a whisper. "They have to," Sierra replied, her voice firm despite the uncertainty gnawing at the back of her mind. "We don't have a choice." Lena nodded, then turned back to the window, watching as a supernova flickered in the distance. She was a dreamer, an artist at heart, not suited for this life. Yet here she was, willing to risk it all for the survival of her people. A poet in a war zone. It was fitting in its own way. At the navigation console, Tess Wildcard Kepler leaned back in her chair, propped up by a battered footrest. Her sharp eyes scanned the readouts as she scrolled through various communications channels. The former thief had a knack for finding holes in things. Holes in security, holes in logic, and on occasion, holes in her own moral compass. Yet her loyalty to the crew was unshakable. "Well, Cap," Tess spoke up, her voice full of her signature edge, "if the Exithar do decide to show up and ruin our party, I'd say we make it interesting, yeah?" Sierra shot her a sideways glance. "What are you suggesting, Kepler?" "Not much. Just a little bit of chaos. Give the Exithar a run for their money. You know, the usual." Tess flashed a grin that could charm a gun out of someone's hands. Sierra smirked despite herself. Do I even want to know what the usual is? Probably not, Tess replied, leaning forward to tweak a few controls on the communications console. But I'd say it involves a whole lot of fireworks, and you'll be thanking me for it later. Before Sierra could respond, Jax called out from the engineering bay. Captain, we've got a fleet on our tail. Sierra's heart skipped a beat. How many? Too many, Jax replied. Exithar destroyers. They must have caught our signal when we jumped into the sector. Lena's eyes widened, a wave of dread crossing her face. We're too close to the outpost. If we run, we won't make it. Sierra stood up from the command chair, the weight of their situation pressing down on her shoulders. She needed to make a decision, and fast. She could feel her crew's eyes on her, waiting for her command. This was her moment. Jax, do we have enough to fight back? She asked, voice steady. Jax didn't hesitate. Not enough to win, but enough to cause a distraction. If we can give the outpost a little breathing room, we might be able to buy enough time for them to send a distress signal to the council. Sierra exhaled, her mind racing through the options. The Exithar were ruthless, relentless in their pursuit of extinction, and they'd have no mercy. They were fast, they were strong, but they weren't human. I'm not throwing my crew into a death trap, she said, turning to face the others. We're going to make it, not just for us, but for everyone. We're going to send that message. Tess jumped up from her seat, her grin widening. Hell yeah! Let's give 'em a show. Lena, typically the dreamer, now stood with a calm resolution in her eyes. Let's show them why they should never underestimate us. Sierra nodded once, her voice hard as steel. Jax, prepare the engines for evasive maneuvers. Kepler, get ready for a fight. Lena, we'll need that message prepped and encrypted. Everyone else, on your toes. As the crew scrambled to their stations, Sierra took one last look at the stars. They were still the underdogs, the underappreciated. But as long as they had each other, they had something that the Exithar would never understand. Something stronger than firepower, something deeper than technology. Adaptability. And as the first Exithar destroyer came into view, Sierra knew one thing for sure. It was humanity's time to rise. The Starfire shook as the first volley of Exithar plasma bolts struck the ship's weakened shields. Sparks flew from consoles, and alarms blared across the bridge. Sierra gritted her teeth, the metallic taste of adrenaline in her mouth. The Exithar were here, and they weren't wasting any time. Shields holding at 37%. Jax shouted from his station, his hands dancing over the controls in a blur of motion. But if they hit us with another round like that, we're toast. Evasive maneuvers, now! Sierra barked, her voice steady despite the rising panic in her chest. On it, Jax replied, his fingers flying across the ship's helm. The Starfire lurched sideways as the ship veered into a series of tight, erratic loops. Every roll and bank took them closer to the nebula's treacherous asteroid fields. A place where neither the Exithar nor any sane pilot would dare to follow. Tess, grinning like a feral cat, grabbed her blaster and pulled herself up from her seat. You said you wanted chaos, Cap, she shouted as the Starfire lurched again. Time to deliver. Hold your fire, Sierra ordered, scanning the view screen. We need to survive, not draw attention. Tessa's grin faltered for a moment, then she shrugged. Fine, fine. But if you're gonna pull some crazy evasive shit, I want to at least shoot at something. Noted, Sierra said dryly, even as her thoughts raced. She needed time. Just enough time to get to the outpost and deliver the message. But with Exithar destroyers breathing down their necks, it was going to be a close call. Lena, she called over her shoulder. Get the encryption key ready. We might have only one shot at this. Lena nodded, already deep into her task. On it, Captain. I've got the code secured, but I can't guarantee it'll work under pressure. Sierra didn't respond, trusting Lena's instincts. The message they carried was humanity's last hope, a plea for help to the Galactic Council, encrypted in a format only the highest officials could decode. If they failed to deliver it, humanity's fate was sealed. No one would know they'd even tried. The Starfire zoomed through the asteroid field, its hull scraping dangerously close to jagged rocks as the Exithar ships pursued relentlessly. Every few moments, the ship would jerk and twist, dodging blasts of energy and sharp debris. It was a dance of life and death. We're not going to make it, Jax muttered, his voice tight. The Exithar aren't just following, they're calculating. They're not dumb. They know where we're going. Sierra's brow furrowed. They had only one way out, through the outpost's shield grid. If they could make it through, they could get close enough to transmit the message directly to the Council's relay stations. If they didn't, we will make it, Sierra said, steely determination in her voice. Trust me. She turned to Tess, who was practically vibrating with energy. Kepler, we're going to need you to give us some breathing room. Get to the lower decks. We need to launch those missiles now. Tessa's eyes lit up like fireworks. A wild spark of excitement flickering behind them. Yes! Now we're talking! She grabbed a bag of explosives from under her seat, slinging it over her shoulder. I'll give them a little surprise, Captain. Sierra nodded, watching as Tess darted off toward the aft hatch. She trusted Kepler more than anyone to get the job done. The Exithar were closing in. Their ships forming a perfect triangle around the Starfire, leaving them no way to escape. The moment had come. Sierra tightened her grip on the armrest of her seat and switched to the ship's internal comms. All hands, brace for impact. We'll be making our move soon. No heroics unless I give the order. Jax gave a tight nod. Already got the launch system primed, Cap. If we can pull this off, we'll be one step ahead. Lena looked up from her station, her fingers flying over the console. Encryption keys ready. Just say the word. Sierra turned back to the view screen, watching as the Exithar ships flanked them on all sides. The flagship, a massive, sleek behemoth, moved in front of them, cutting off any escape routes. Its guns were already charging for another deadly salvo. Now, Jax! Sierra shouted. With a heavy metallic growl, the Starfire lurched forward, diving straight toward the heart of the asteroid field, cutting through the jagged debris at breakneck speed. The ship's hull groaned in protest, the metal squealing under the stress. 5 seconds to launch! Jax called out, his voice grating with strain. Sierra's eyes never left the Exithar ships as they pursued, the black behemoths looming larger and larger. Sweat dripped down her temple. This was it. No turning back. "Kepler," she muttered into the comms. "Now!" A loud explosion shook the ship's lower decks, followed by a secondary blast. Tess had set off the charges. The Exithar ships jerked as debris rained down on them, momentarily blinded and confused by the chaos. "Launch!" Jack screamed. With a violent shudder, the Starfire released a series of makeshift torpedoes, an unpredictable mess of energy fields, explosive charges, and fragments of Exithar tech that Jax had scavenged and rigged together. The missiles shot toward the enemy, detonating on impact in brilliant flashes of light. The Exithar flagship took the brunt of the explosion. Its shields flickered, and the massive ship veered off course, temporarily disabled. The other ships hesitated, their tactics thrown into disarray by the unexpected onslaught. Sierra's heart pounded in her chest. She had them, just enough time to slip through the gap. "Go! Go! Go!" she shouted, slamming the throttle forward. The Starfire shot through the remaining chaos, its nose dipping below an asteroid, then climbing steeply into the vast unknown of the nebula. Behind them, the Exithar ship struggled to regain control. But it was too late. The Starfire had found its opening. As the ship shot into the safety of the nebula's swirling gases, the Exithar were left behind, their weapons useless in the turbulent environment. The bridge fell silent, save for the hum of the ship's engines. The crew could only listen to the distant echo of their survival. Sierra let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "We did it," she said quietly. Jack slumped back in his seat, his face pale from the stress. "Yeah, for now." Lena finally smiled, her optimism rekindled. "And the message?" Sierra turned to her, her jaw set. "We've got one shot. Let's make it count." The Starfire glided through the thick fog of the nebula, its engine hum the only sound that punctuated the quiet after the chaos of their narrow escape. The Exithar, now far behind, had been momentarily outwitted. But the brief triumph did little to ease the heavy weight pressing on Sierra's chest. "We've bought ourselves some time," Sierra said, her voice low but resolute as she looked at the holographic star map on the table. "But not much." Lena stood by the comm station, tapping at her console. "I've isolated the frequency for the Council Relay Network, Captain," she said, her voice a little more cheerful than it had been before. "But there's a problem." Sierra raised an eyebrow. "What's the problem?" "It's not just a simple transmission. We need to override the existing signal encryption before we can send out our message. And that'll take time. It's not like we have unlimited bandwidth up here, you know." "Time," Jax muttered from his corner, sitting slumped over a diagnostic pad. He was already trying to calculate their trajectory through the nebula, but he couldn't keep the frustration out of his voice. "That's the one thing we don't have. The Exithar won't stop hunting us. Even if we disable their flagship, their cruisers are more than capable of tracking us through this cloud, and they'll keep pushing us until we're either dead or out of range." Tess, lounging on the railing of the bridge with her arms crossed, leaned forward. "What if we use the relay system against them? I mean, it's designed to transmit sensitive information, right? What's stopping us from sending out a fake distress signal? Sierra shot her a sharp glance. That would be a one-way ticket to getting ourselves trapped in a dead zone. And even if it worked, the Exithar would eventually know we were bluffing when they find no one responding. Right, right, Tess said, raising both hands in mock surrender. Just trying to spice things up a bit. She leaned back again, staring at the stars outside, her mind already working on some other solution. Sierra exhaled. We'll take the risk. We'll need to transmit the message, and we'll need a clean signal. There's no room for errors now. As Lena worked feverishly at her console, decrypting the old codes and plugging them into the ship's ancient comm system, Sierra walked over to the viewport. The nebula stretched out before her in a beautiful, hauntingly empty expanse. It was strange. So many worlds, so many species, yet humanity's voice was little more than a whisper in the vastness of space. She clenched her fists at her sides. Just a little longer, she murmured to herself. Hold on. Back at the communication station, Lena adjusted a few settings and then leaned back in her chair. Okay, the message is ready to send. I've patched it into the encrypted network. All we need is to make sure the transmission is intercepted by the Council's relay stations, and there's only one place where we can do that. Sierra nodded, sensing the danger ahead. The relay beacon at Nebula 11. The Exithar have been blocking it for months, but if we can reach it, we'll have a direct line to the Council, but it's a straight shot through their blockade. Jax punched a few numbers on his console, his eyes narrowing. The beacon's in the middle of Exithar-controlled space. You think we can make it there without being spotted? If we move fast and stay low, we might, Sierra said, her eyes burning with determination. The moment we pop out of this nebula, they'll be on us in seconds. But if we're lucky, we'll have just enough time to transmit the message. Lena took a deep breath. Once it's out there, we've done all we can. We've just got to pray the Council acts quickly. Then we'll have to pray harder than we've ever prayed before, Tess muttered, now fully engaged in the task at hand. But hey, no pressure, right? The Starfire veered sharply out of the nebula, its engines roaring back to life as they hurtled toward the dark, oppressive space where the Exithar fleet waited. The crew had no illusions about what would happen if they were spotted too early. It was a one-way mission. Either the Council would respond in time, or they would be caught, their fates sealed. On course for Nebula 11, Jax called from the navigation station. The Exithar ships are on the other side of the system. They won't know we're here unless we go to full power. Sierra glanced at Lena, who had her fingers crossed over the console. Ready to transmit? Lena nodded, her hands steady, but her face betraying the anxiety she tried to mask. Ready as I'll ever be. Then we move now, Sierra said, gripping the command seat. All hands, brace yourselves. As the ship surged forward, they all knew this wasn't just about survival anymore. This wasn't just about getting away. It was about delivering hope to a dying species, about sending the last message to a council that might not even remember humanity existed. The Exithar fleet loomed in the distance. Their massive ships were dark silhouettes against the backdrop of distant stars. And between them and the Starfire was the last hope humanity had. Nebula 11. The Relay Beacon. Now! Sierra shouted. Lena pressed the transmit button. The Starfire shuddered as the encrypted message shot across the void, heading straight for the beacon. Transmission in progress, Lena said, her eyes scanning the data. It's out there, but now we wait. Sierra didn't look away from the view screen. The Exithar destroyers were closing in, their weapons charging. They had seconds, maybe fewer, before the enemy would open fire. The silence on the bridge was deafening, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Then the lights on the console flickered and a warning signal rang through the ship. Lena's face turned pale. Incoming transmission from the Council. Patch it through, Sierra ordered, her voice filled with a new wave of urgency. The screen flickered and then stabilized. A figure appeared on the hollow screen. It was an older man with silver hair and sharp, calculating eyes. Someone who had clearly seen too much of war. Captain Williams, he said, his voice calm but laced with authority. I'm Councillor Malcor. We've received your message. Sierra's heart pounded in her chest. Councillor, you have to send help. The Exithar. We know, Captain, Malcor interrupted, his gaze hardening. We've been monitoring their movements for months. But, he hesitated, we cannot promise immediate action. Sierra's stomach sank. What? You can't be serious. We've been holding on by a thread, and now... We understand, Captain, but the Council has its own priorities, and you are not the only species in danger. Sierra felt her grip on the armrest tighten until her knuckles went white. I'm sending you everything I have, and you're telling me that the survival of humanity isn't enough for you to act? Malcor's eyes flickered with something like regret, but his voice remained unmoved. You must understand. We have to think of the bigger picture. Sierra's fists clenched. Her breath came in shallow, angry bursts. Then humanity is on its own. The hollow screen flickered out, leaving only the harsh hum of the Starfire's engines in the dead silence of the bridge. Sierra's chest tightened as the weight of Councillor Malcor's words sunk in. The message had gone through, but the response, if it could even be called that, felt like a slap in the face. Not enough to act, Sierra repeated bitterly, staring at the empty space where the Councillor's face had once been. They know humanity's on the brink, and yet they're willing to sit back and watch us burn. Jax ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. They're using us as leverage. If we survive, maybe they'll get a better deal. If we don't, well, they won't have to waste resources saving us. He sighed, his voice heavy with disbelief. Politicians! Tess, who had been unusually quiet during the exchange, spoke up, her voice hard. Sierra, this isn't just about diplomacy. We don't need the Council. We need action. She slammed her fist against the wall, her eyes blazing. If they're not gonna help, then we'll make them see what happens when they turn their backs on us. Lena stepped forward, a strange calmness in her demeanor. I've been thinking. We still have the encrypted data. What if there's something more in the message? Something that could give us an edge? A signal they didn't catch? Sierra turned to her. What do you mean? I don't know, Lena said slowly, her fingers already dancing over the console as if she could see something the others couldn't. Maybe there's an anomaly. Maybe our message was too clean, too perfect. The encryption wasn't just a transmission. It could have been a way to access other data. Sierra's gaze sharpened. So you're saying the message wasn't just a call for help? Lena nodded. Exactly, it might be a key. Or maybe something that gives us an upper hand against the Exithar. We won't know until we dig into it. Do it, Sierra ordered. We can't afford to wait around for the council. If there's anything in that message we can use, we need to find it now. The seconds felt like hours as Lena worked, her fingers tapping against the keys with a rapid, relentless rhythm. Tess paced back and forth, her restlessness palpable. Jack stood by the window, keeping an eye on the Exithar fleet, which was now beginning to regroup, circling around the nebula, no doubt aware of their presence. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Lena's voice broke the silence. There's something here, she said, her tone filled with both excitement and disbelief. It's not just a simple message. It's a data trail. Looks like the encryption was designed to hide more than just a signal. It's a map to a hidden facility, a weapons depot maybe. And there's something else. Sierra's heart skipped a beat. What else? Lena hesitated. There's a reference to a project. Project Titan. It's classified, and there's no information about what it is, but the map leads directly to it. Project Titan, Sierra murmured, the name ringing in her mind like a distant echo. Where does the map point to? Lena hesitated, then typed in a few more commands, pulling up a star system on the holomap. This is the location. It's not far, just past the Exithar blockade. Sierra's eyes narrowed as she studied the coordinates. It was bold, reckless, but it might just be their best shot at turning the tide. So, we go in. We find this Titan and hope it's enough to change the course of this war. Jax turned away from the viewport. It's a gamble, but it's the only one we've got. Tessa's voice was low, but there was a fire in it. I say we take it. I don't know about you all, but I'm tired of just running. It's time to hit back. Sierra exhaled slowly, her mind racing. She couldn't let her emotions cloud her judgment, but the weight of what was at stake was almost too much to bear. Humanity was on the edge. The council had turned its back on them. The Exithar were closing in. But here was a glimmer of hope, a shot in the dark that might just be enough to flip the entire situation on its head. We do it, Sierra said finally, her voice calm and resolute. We find Project Titan, and we make sure the Exithar know we're not done yet. As the Starfire altered its course, heading toward the coordinates Lena had uncovered, the crew found themselves once again united by a singular purpose. The stakes had never been higher. There were no guarantees, no backup plans, and no guarantees of survival. But they knew one thing. If humanity was to survive, it would be up to them to prove their worth. The Starfire cruised past asteroid fields, dodged the remnants of old space stations, and navigated through uncharted regions of space. They were heading straight into enemy territory, into a place few would dare to go. The Exithar would expect a desperate move like this. They would be prepared. But the crew of the Starfire had one thing the enemy didn't. Improvisation. This is going to get messy, Jack said, his voice tense. Once we break through the blockade, there won't be any turning back. Good, Tess said with a grin. I've been looking forward to messy. Lena was deep in thought, her brow furrowed as she worked at her console. I just hope we're not walking into a trap. If Project Titan isn't as important as the Council made it sound, we need to be ready for anything. Sierra shot her a look. Whatever it is, we'll face it together. As the Starfire approached the final stretch toward the Exithar blockade, Sierra knew they were about to make the most dangerous move of their lives. The crew had no illusions. The risks were immense. But there was no turning back. They had already given everything they had to get this far. And now, they were going to give it all again.